Kendrick Lamar's latest album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, just released over 2 years ago. My name is Jacob Mack, and today I will be analyzing one of the biggest hip-hop albums of the 2020s. From his first album debuting in 2011, titled Section 80, which was a play on words from his apartment complex and being born in the 1980s, this ultimately fueled his career for what it is today. Focusing on the 1980 crack epidemic, drug abuse, racism, and Ronald Reagan's presidency, Section 80 got popular initially as a mixtape in Kendrick's hometown. Furthermore, after the album was released, Snoop Dogg, during a performance, passed the torch on to Kendrick, saying, "You better run with it." With all the pressure on his shoulders, Kendrick did exactly that. Kendrick solidified himself early as one of the best newer rappers during the time in 2012 with Good Kid, Mad City. This was another concept album similar to Section 80, tying his own experiences together with a conceptual writing style, forming one of the most iconic hip-hop albums that exist today.
After the groundbreaking release of Good Kid, Mad City, Kendrick would go on to featuring on many other artists' albums, appearing on songs such as Schoolboy Q's Collard Greens, A$AP Rocky's One Train, and Pusha T's Nostalgia, for a few examples. Following up with a single release of I, Kendrick would notably release one of the most impactful hip-hop albums to date. To Pimp a Butterfly, which was originally going to be titled To Pimp a Caterpillar for the abbreviation Tupac, was a very different sound for Kendrick in relation to his past two albums. The entire project is centered around jazz and funk, and ultimately this is totally different from what he had done before. And with a heavy perspective on the United States and a cynical take on each track towards what modern United States is during this time, this is a very raw album lyrically, and you can take hours and hours and hours to decipher some of these songs. Throughout the album, there is a poem being read, and at the end of the album, the entire poem is recited to Tupac, which he had died in 1996, so obviously he wasn't on the actual album, but the uncovered recording of Tupac at the end of the album made it sound like he was being interviewed by Kendrick, which is a really cool concept in itself. The end of the album is where Tupac ends up dying, and this is one of the most culturally impactful albums in recent years. Years later, this album would still hold cultural impact, as some of the songs, such as All Right, were used in BLM protesting. People would be reciting the chorus in the streets during these protests.
We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gon' be alright.
In 2017, Kendrick released his most popular album to date, titled Damn. This 14-track long album featured all the hard hitters that were centered around what humans were actually made of, metaphorically and literally. This album is Kendrick's darkest, as in the beginning track with Blood, you can hear him and the conversation with someone where he ends up dying. The album rewinds his life, showing what people are made of and the flaws within society. The intro track features a sample from Fox News stating that hip-hop has done more damage than racism in recent years, which is insane in itself. It goes into the next song titled DNA, which is one of his most popular songs to date, and with each of these song titles, with blood, DNA, and element, and what people are generally made of, it goes into love and lust and God and the things that make up people for what they believe in and what they stand for. Damn would become Kendrick's most streamed album of all time, also one of the most streamed hip-hop albums of all time to this day. Damn would also receive Kendrick a Pulitzer Prize, reshaping the standards of hip-hop as a genre and also focusing mainly on the writing aspect, which is very interesting, as Damn is full of a lot of hit songs, and it goes to show how impactful Kendrick's writing truly can be. In 2018, Kendrick, alongside Top Dog Entertainment, which was the label he was under at the time, curated the soundtrack for the Black Panther movie. But after all of this blow up with fame and numbers skyrocketing, Kendrick seemingly disappears after 2018. But then finally, after 5 years of having released Damn, back in 2017, Kendrick releases Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. So to analyze Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, what is this album? What does it mean? And how has it impacted Kendrick's discography compared to everything else he's done and moving forward? To start off, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is Kendrick's most introspective work by far. Seemingly ripping the band-aid off of unhealed wounds, Kendrick exposes many issues that he has dealt with as a highly regarded artist, advocating against materialism, opening up about deep-rooted family issues, and relating his experiences to negative perceptions of certain groups in society, and most importantly focusing on amending family issues and facing conflict head-on. Throughout the album, there will be tap dancing at the start and end of some songs, serving as some sort of metaphor that conversations are being tiptoed around and not confronted, which is ultimately the stigma that Kendrick wants to face in this. Along with the tap dancing, this album serves as a stage play, which is another interesting way to tell a story through an album. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is a double album, the first half being the Big Steppers and the second being Mr. Morale. And with these two halves, there are 9 tracks on each side, and it serves as a mirror of itself, where ultimately many of the tracks would be reflecting on one another. And for some examples, United in Grief, the intro track to the Big Steppers, expresses many ways Kendrick has dealt with grief in the past and is yearning to find peace of mind. And from spending money on cars, houses, and jewelry, he expresses that there are many different ways people grieve, whether it's healthy or not. Mirroring this song, the last song on the second half of Mr. Morale is titled Mirror. This is Kendrick's resolution to all of his problems with the pressure he has with the status he holds, his maturity with becoming a father, and finally accepting things for what they are and prioritizing himself, restating the chorus, I choose me, I'm sorry. This mirror theme continues with the title tracks as well, with Worldwide Steppers and Mr. Morale being mirrored exactly from one another in each half of the album, and the first half being the Big Steppers focusing on society and a lot of issues with people and groups, and Mr. Morale being more of a individual introspective side with Kendrick's personal issues and transgressions. Focusing on the media side of things, Kendrick has been a very influential character in music media, with each of his albums being different in a conceptual story and involving different kinds of media. Kendrick's consistent innovation in music poses him as one of the most unique and influential figures in hip-hop currently. Each album tells us a different story in a different fashion, from Section 80 being a campfire story, Good Kid, Mad City being a movie tape, Tip Up a Butterfly being a poem, Damn being written in the style of a magazine, which each song title, and Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers being a stage play. All these unique creative approaches to each different project of his continuously adds to his ever-growing discography and has ultimately made conceptual hip-hop as popular as it is today. And although I have been sharing a lot of my perspective on how it's been impactful over the years with music media and the different ways of conceptualizing albums, I would like to also take time to interview Mr. Ziegler, a government teacher here at Carmel High School, who would like to share his perspective on Kendrick Lamar and his music impact.
Yes, so Mr. James Ziegler, James, last name Ziegler, Ziegler. So I'm a teacher here at Carmel High School. I teach in the Social Studies Department and teach AP African American Studies, IB History, and U.S. Government. I would say probably when I first started listening to hip hop was as soon as I had always loved music as a little kid. A lot of times it was more just like stuff my dad or siblings would listen to, like classic rock, Beatles, Rolling Stones, all that. But when we had moved to Indiana, that was right at the time that, like, you know, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Warren G, you know, Biggie, Tupac, Eminem, you know, that was kind of like the crux where hip hop was really starting to become mainstream. So there's a lot there, I think, with Kendrick. Kind of similar to how you've sometimes heard people like describe like a Bob Dylan as like a voice of his generation, you know, who kind of was able to articulate what was going on socially and politically at their time. I think in some ways, you know, in the hip hop realm, Kendrick kind of picks up that bastion as a voice of his generation. His political commentaries on his songs, you know, whether it's talking about issues of racism, police brutality, institutional racism, things of that nature, all the way just to even social commentaries, like, you know, Mr. Morale and the Big Stepper, looking at like mental health and kind of like personal experiences and how those experiences in our life shape us. And so I think, you know, one of the things about his music is, again, you know, a lot of people, he has the ability to convey things through his music, through his lyrics, even through sometimes his visuals and his music videos that people can relate to, or, you know, that, hey, somebody else is sharing this experience. And so I think that's one of the great powers as a musician, is when you can articulate other people's experiences and what they're going through, and maybe help create a lens that the public who hasn't experienced those things always can see into. I think that's, you know, a really big power. Another thing too I think about him is just his approach to creating albums. You know, I think, you know, he does it with a purpose, and, you know, whether it's creating like a theme throughout an entire album. And that's a really cool thing, and I think that just kind of builds on the tradition, again, of storytelling. When you look at like African history and even influences on hip hop, you know, we could trace influences on hip hop and rap all the way back to like ancient Africa, and in particular in West Africa, Alan the Big Stepper. One of the things that I thought, for some people they loved the album, other people were a little bit more critical of it. It was cool to see an artist be kind of a little bit more transparent in their writing. And in the production, and one of the songs, the song Auntie Diaries, and that was something for me, that song over the last years gained even further importance, just in the sense that I have a nephew who's trans. Luckily, he, from our personal family, didn't have to deal with some of the homophobia that, you know, Kendrick has talked about, that he then kind of projected onto his family members who were, you know, transitioning or were transgender. But it's kind of in that album and in that song in particular, it was cool to see his vulnerability and being honest about it, and also seeing kind of his growth in terms of how he changed some of his perceptions of how he viewed his loved ones and family members. That's an important lesson for us as Americans, you know, to take a look in the mirror. And we might not always like what's looking back at us, and it might be hard to admit that, but it's an important thing for us to do, because if we are ever going to grow as individuals and as a country, it starts with us being real about ourselves, who we are, our faults, you know, what we need to change. That song just kind of really jumped out at me on that album, but like I said, I thought it was an important thing for him to do. Probably, you know, I'd have to imagine it wasn't an easy song for him to write, you know, admitting some of the things, you know, on that album. I think it is an important message that, you know, we need to be honest with ourselves if we're going to grow as individuals, if we're going to grow as a society, and even as a country. I think that applies to us, like I said, on a bigger scale, in terms of looking at who we are as a people and what we could do to grow and get better.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. Then ultimately, Kendrick Lamar has changed hip-hop in many ways, with unique writing styles, storytelling, and lyrics that speak to social issues that have made huge impacts in recent years. Kendrick has seemingly solidified himself as one of the greatest artists alive. And to finally conclude, I recommend anyone and everyone to listen to Kendrick's discography, as certainly it's enjoyable music and it sheds a light on certain issues in society and for certain minority groups. And hearing from such a different creative perspective as his is very eye-opening for many, and his impact on music should not be undermined. Thank you.